This is Again for the First Time with your host, Darren Redmond.
Hello, my name is Darren Redmond, as you know, and we're on the Again for the First Time podcast. I'm going to read a tweet from my guest, Genevieve Meyer. This tweet was from 3/11/23, so not too long ago, just around this time in the morning. It was at 7:12. And here's the tweet. I was sold to our landlord to pay the rent at 11, then forced to marry my 43-year-old perp at the tender age of 15. I would struggle for decades to find peace, healing, and build some kind of life. In the last few years, I've transformed my trauma into purpose, and I use my story, my voice, to educate and advocate for changes in laws to cause children to be exploited. I am employed with a youth serving organization where I am able to continue education on human trafficking, prevention, and response, and brings stakeholders to the table to tackle these changing societal challenges. Nice to meet you. And I have to tell you, Genevieve, it is nice to meet you. Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning.
For those who, first of I'll let this sink in, for those who will listen to us and don't know you and your story, what would you like to share about your past? The stage is yours, so people get to know you a little bit, and then we could talk about some of the wonderful, enlightening work that you're doing to make people aware of where we are with this situation of child marriage.
Sure. Thank you very much. And thank you for having me on today. It's always a pleasure to talk with other people and highlight the issues and also talk about the way forward, how we can resolve some of these issues. So as you said, I'm Genevieve. What I'm well known for is overcoming some serious obstacles early in my life and significant amounts of trauma. So I've experienced pretty much every type of abuse by the time I was 15 years old. Sexual abuse, psychological abuse on multiple occasions, physical abuse, neglect. I was deprived and neglected of my education. I only went to 6th grade. And then ultimately, what I'm most well known for, as far as what gets picked up by the media, is that I was married to my perpetrator at the tender age of 15. He was 43. He had criminal charges pending against him, and the marriage was a way to make that go away. So he didn't have to serve time in jail. So I essentially received that prison sentence. So my case, it wasn't religiously motivated. I wasn't part of a cult. Some of the things that people often associate with child marriage, it just really is a loophole to facilitate legalized child abuse. And I was able to untangle from that situation. By the time I was about 22, I was able to get legally divorced. And then I would spend the next decade or so trying to rebuild my life, trying to find some kind of peace, addressing, the significant toll that it took on my mental health, learning how to show up in healthy relationships, as well as struggling to get enough education and skills to be able to support myself and my children. All the while dealing with, symptoms of PTSD and trauma. And, when I left that relationship, I never really heard the term trauma. I think back then, so this would have been 2002, back then, we were really starting to highlight that trauma happens to rape survivors, survivors of domestic violence. It's not just something that occurs in a wartime setting. That other people, children that have suffered significant abuse, the toll that it takes. We had the ACEs survey, that's come out that, talks about adverse childhood experiences and how that can take a toll on you and significantly impact your physical health, as well as your mental well-being, as well as the things that you have access to in your life. So that leads me to where I am now. I worked really hard to create a different life for myself and to definitely raise my children differently. So I did a lot of research of just, what is it to be a good parent? What does that look like? I was able to return to school. My graduate degree is a psychology degree. So really understand adolescent development, child development, ways that that could be disrupted, impacts of trauma, and how to address those. See, right? Because when you experience something really traumatic or difficult, it doesn't necessarily have to be a life sentence. It's an opportunity there. You can build resilience, you can move past it, and you can be a stronger person. Do I recommend that road for everybody? To go through something really horrible and traumatic so that you can be a stronger person? No, but I think it's important to understand that you can address the issue and you can recover from it. So, the first half of my life was really difficult, but the second half of my life has actually been quite great. My husband of choice and I, we celebrated our 16th wedding anniversary about a week ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We've put down roots in the Midwest, and we've raised 4 kids. Our youngest is 15. She's the only one that we have still at home with us. My kids have grown up and transitioned into adulthood, and they're pretty happy, well-adjusted, successful people. So I just really tried to share that, not only just the difficult things that I went through, but just that hope and possibility that things can be different. That's what I spend a lot of my time doing now, is bringing stakeholders to the table of understanding prevention. Let's go ahead and prevent really terrible things from happening in the beginning. Online child exploitation is huge. It's something that's new and we're dealing with, and we're trying to figure out how to protect our kids from. Human trafficking, being lured out, what that really looks like. And then ultimately the scourge of child marriage, which a lot of people don't realize exists. I didn't realize it existed. I thought that I was just one person that fell through a series of loopholes and, that allowed this to happen to me. I was astonished to learn, how often it happens. The numbers say 300,000 minors between 2000 and 2008 have been married. The majority of them have been married to adult men, or girls, adolescent girls that have been married to adult men, with enormous divorce rates, high levels of poverty, lack of education, domestic violence. They're not able to access resources. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that is my story. Just seeing that played out over and over again. And it was really disheartening to see that the issue really wasn't being addressed, or was just barely starting to be addressed, and how widespread it was, and that we have some states that have no minimum age floor. And I mean, it was difficult enough.
California.
Yeah. California,
Where I live.
right?
Yeah.
Right. So it was really difficult at 15 to go through that. I couldn't imagine being a 12, 11, 10-year-old child going through that. And it absolutely happens. And, one child in that situation is too much. So I've been working a lot to raise awareness of the issue, to educate legislators and community stakeholders, and to raise the minimum age to marry to 18, no exceptions, in every state across the country.
I'm just flabbergasted, and I don't make light of this at all. How you can, in a state like California, get married at any age, as long as you have one parental consent signature, but you can't buy a vape pen until you're 21.
Right. You can't access a tanning bed. You can't get a tattoo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, we had a little bit of a pre-interview conversation, and I just think people are not aware of this, that like this goes on hiding in public sight. There's nothing behind the scenes. It's out there. People just don't know that it's going on. And I think what the work you're doing for so many reasons is so wonderful. They're just letting people know, hey, this is what's going on. Stakeholders, politicians, anybody, this is what's going on. And I am so happy, not about what happened to you, of course, that's horrible, but that you have been able to raise your voice in a way that is astute, which is in a way that is understanding, because you are so well learned. I want to talk about that in a minute. I mean, you have the highest degrees in multiple of them, and I'm very, very impressed with that. I want to ask you about that. Do you think part of that, if we could play kind of living room psychologist for a second, was because you can control your education? You were involved in so many things in your life that were out of your control. Because I know, for example, in my world, I ended up finishing my undergraduate degree when I was like 35 and getting my master's when I was in my 40s for that reason. And I didn't go through anything like you went through, but I just felt like this is what I want to do for me and to kind of help people in the nonprofit world and everything else. Speak about your education for a second before we talk about child marriage, because I'm so proud, if I may use those terms, of the work that you do on your own education, on your own self.
Sure. Well, that was really something that I really desperately wanted. That actually was the carrot that was dangled in front of me to get me to comply and not fight against the child marriage. Was and when the possibility of marrying this person was proposed, I certainly didn't have any good examples of what a marriage looked like. My mother really struggled and things were really volatile, and she was in one of the most unhealthiest relationships I have ever come across. So I didn't really know what that looked like, or really what those expectations were. So I didn't know if it was like just a marriage on paper, and then I would go back and live with my mom, or I didn't know what that looked like. But I was told that I would be able to finally enroll in school because I had missed junior high completely. When this all started, I was actually 14. It was the spring of the year that I turned 14. So I was supposed to enroll in my freshman year of high school the fall before. That didn't happen. And then, this was continually dangled in front of me. Needless to say, I never did return to high school. So I didn't go to high school absolutely at all. And I didn't know that I was intelligent either, because I was told that I was stupid my entire life. I was treated like I was dumb. I was treated like I couldn't make my own decisions. So I really had no idea the level of intelligence that I had until much later. And I just got to the point where I needed to be self-sufficient. I needed to be able to support myself, and I needed to be able to support my children, regardless of what kind of relationship status I was in. I needed that autonomy and I needed that stability. So the first thing was just go take my GED. And I did that a few times, and I ran into some obstacles because guess what? I had 3 kiddos under 4.
Right. Right.
And I didn't necessarily have the money or the ability to pay for childcare to go study for my GED. So that was kind of a couple strikeouts there in the beginning of when I first started to obtain my GED. One of the big key things that helped me is I found a program that offered GED classes as well as childcare.
Oh,
so I was able to take my young children. They were looked after. And it turns out I only needed to go to GED classes for a couple times. And then another obstacle was it cost $70 to take the GED test back then, which for me was a significant amount of money, almost to the point where it might not be attainable.
Right.
So I was told that if I continue with the classes, then they would cover the fee for me to take my GED. I knew that, things like algebra and geometry were part of the GED exam. I had never had any exposure to either of those things at all. So I anticipated that I would still need to continue to work in the math, but I was always a really avid reader. I read a lot. I read at a very high level. And that's actually how I was able to fly under the radar for not being educated at home. My mom, quote unquote, said I was homeschooled. And sometimes I would have to take some kind of state standardized testing to prove that I wasn't real behind. And I passed that testing just based on my reading level that was so high because I read so much. That was my escape as a kid. I read all the time. So I passed that part of the test, and I thought they told me that the GED test was in different parts. And if you pass all of them except for one, as long as you take the one that you didn't pass within a year, you didn't have to take the whole thing again. So I just went for it, ripped off the Band-Aid, and surprisingly passed all of the tests. And then I was offered scholarships.
Because you earned them, because for a variety of reasons. I tell people that I used to coach collegiate softball. I coach high school softball now. And whether it's academic or scholastic or needs-based, I tell people, you earn that scholarship that you're getting. Nobody's just giving it to you. There are covenants that you need to do, and you made it. Well, talk to me about it. Tell me where I'm wrong with that,
Oh, well, it was just kind of one door open, and I kind of walked through that door, and then another door open, and I walked through that door.
Mhm.
So I was interested in education and healthcare. That was kind of my two areas of just where I could get skills and get that would lead me to well-paying, stable job. And ultimately that led me to human services. So my bachelor's degree is in human services, and then I also have another bachelor's degree in public policy and political science. Because and that's where I'm at now. Just that, we have amazing services, and we have service providers, and we have people out there every day that are giving absolutely everything they have to help people, and the laws just do not support the work that they're doing. Right? We have so many.
Absolutely. And that's the thing that keeps me up at night when I'm trying to figure out what to do and how to help.
Mhm.
And without sounding like a superhero, no, the work is really done by the people you'll never meet. You'll
Mhm.
never understand who they are. Um, Back to, you know, we talk about your past as you move forward. How did you find yourself? You had a lot of broken people in your past, without going into specifics. I've heard you
Yes.
mention things that happened with your mom and how you made amends and she was in bad situations. People will never understand that on the outside because people read a headline, they read a tweet, they hear half a podcast, and they make assumptions without
Yeah.
getting into the stuff that's going on. How did you find your ability to say, I know I'm intrinsically intelligent. I know that I want to help people. Who around you, or where did you find your inspiration with all of this chaos going on to say, I have value here in myself and I have value and things that I want to do? Walk me through that process because it's stunning that you were able to do what you did in the situations that you found yourself in.
Sure. Well, I think part of it is that mechanism that tells you should be afraid of things and hold back might be broken in me.
That's a good thing. That's a good thing.
so so that's been helpful
I
in that
love the way you
regard.
put that. That's wonderful.
I just and a lot of it was survival mode, just to keep swimming. I didn't know at what point I could stop and be safe. I just had kind of kept going, and so that drive, just to keep going and keep accomplishing and keep moving forward, and just get far away from where I started. And that was a big part of it. But I've been through some really difficult, frightening, scary things. And when you've been through that kind of stuff, talking to a room full of people and asking them to support your mission and what you're doing, that's not scary.
No, that's
To some people that's scary, but to me, that's just like, we're going to go do this. So yeah, just being pretty fearless, but also, understanding what people need, really intrinsically understanding what the need is, understanding how to pull people together. I
mhm,
think being a pleasant, likable person also is very helpful in that regard. If people want you in
agreed.
a room, people want you to be there. I think that is something that sets me apart from a lot of other activists is that, a lot of people want to have conversations with me. They want me in the room. I look for ways that both sides, can win while still moving the issue. Like, this is the issue that I really care about, but I'm also willing to help you, with this issue as well. Let's work together.
When we try to work on changing the thought process of people, uh, for example, you mentioned in the past, and we won't go too much into it today, where you could judge shop different states and different things, and that most
Mhm.
people don't know that that goes on in the world. And
No, they don't.
that ties right into child marriage, and that goes into some of the other things that goes on. And I mean, well-meaning movie of the week type stuff. Show my age. Um, people think that this only goes on in other places. It only goes on with ritualistic religion, but that's not true. It goes on all the time for various reasons: debt, drugs, just getting back at your one-time significant other. There's
Mhm.
so many things that go on that people just don't realize, and I think people would genuinely be shocked at how much of this goes on in the world. When you bring this to a new community, when you go speak somewhere, and you're probably speaking to people that have some sort of an idea, do you see the looks on their face, just the jaws drop when you talk
Yes.
about how much? Walk me through that.
Yes. Well, that's kind of the goal right now, is when I get to a point where people's jaws stop dropping when I talk to them about the issue, then I'll know it's time to start looking at retirement. Until then, I'm going to keep going. But
Unfortunately,
yeah,
I don't think
that's
you're retiring for a long time, unfortunately.
yeah, we'll keep plugging away at it. But no, you're absolutely right. It is something that's hiding in plain sight. A lot of people are seeing it, but not really realizing what it is. Also, another thing I run into is they don't realize how harmful and detrimental it is. So a lot of people, they think, of minors getting married, they're thinking of high school sweethearts who just can't wait, or maybe there's a baby on the way, and they're the ones that are getting married and they're young, but with some family support and community support, it'll all work out. And that is absolutely true in the 1930s.
Right, right.
That is not true in our society today. Families and individuals are increasingly isolated. They're not connected to their families. They don't have the family and community support that they had before. And we have the data, we have the numbers. It is minor girls marrying adult men, and there's an
Yeah,
instantaneous power imbalance there, right? So he's been able
absolutely.
to graduate from high school, maybe being able to acquire some skills, so that he can be employed. He, most likely that wherever they're living, that lease or mortgage is in his name, because the minor is not going to be on any of that paperwork. The bank account and the money is going to be in his name and his control, the car, everything. A 15, 16, 17-year-old girl is not going to be able to acquire assets or have that power that he is. So when things go wrong, she can't access that help. So, if you've got a 17-year-old that's trying to divorce a 28-year-old, they've got two children, he's going to be able to hire an attorney. Guess what? That 17-year-old can't enter into a contract with an attorney to represent herself and her children.
Right.
So just understanding how that works. Yeah.
I've unfortunately spoken to a few child brides in the past on the show. I say, unfortunate that it happens. I'm going to have more
Mm-hmm.
and more so people can hear what's going on. And one of them, and I'll look up my podcast, I won't say the name or whatever. She mentioned something that's very interesting. So the law in whatever state may allow you, in your case, get married at 14, 15 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And let's just say a year later, you're able to get a divorce. You have a kid now, by the way. It's just
Mm-hmm.
talk about it. You're too young to rent a house. You're too young.
Right.
Even if you had the means, now you went from allowed to have sex with a grown ass man in
Mm-hmm.
his 40s, but now you can't rent a place to live.
Right. You can't file for a protective order either. I was actually just in that space, serving as a victim advocate last week, and there's a big old sign right there that said, if you're under 18, you cannot file for your own protective order. A parent or guardian has to do it for you.
So without jumping ahead, because my hope is that people who might be in this situation might be listening right now. What's the first thing that young lady should do?
Reach out to the domestic violence hotline. I think that's
Great.
probably I can't guarantee what resources will be there, but that is definitely a start. So the National Domestic Violence Hotline will put them in touch with the domestic violence shelters and programs specifically in their area.
Mhm.
And then the services that they offer vary, but some examples of those services are, of course, emergency shelter and housing, access to clean clothes and toiletries, access to food. Sometimes they're able to help with transportation, access to mental health, and then also access to the other things that provide stability. So assistance on completing high school or getting your GED, assistance with job skills, writing a resume, practice interviews. And a lot of places even have a program called Dress for Success, where you can go,
Oh, yeah.
you can receive a voucher and you can get professional clothing to where to your work, to your new job that you've been able to get. But just that support to help you get on your feet. They also can help you if you're in a violent situation, and you have to file for a protective order, and navigating the legal system and making sure that you're represented and you understand your rights.
There are so many laws that are meant to protect people that unfortunately hinder sometimes people. I know of a child that I spoke to who's married common law.
Mhm.
And some of those services, some really wonderful organizations that help people who were married, domestic violence, for example, couldn't help her
Right.
because she wasn't married. And wow, it just amazes me that there's so many gaps in the system. And the reason the gaps are there isn't because somebody's nefarious from a governmental or from an outreach location. It's because we need to put as much light on these situations as possible to see where the problems are, where the
Mhm.
gaps are. And there's so much to do there. For example, there has to be a database somewhere that says, all right, we allow child marriages. If here's the list of ones we've allowed in the year 2023, for example. If these become a divorce and this person files, we've treated them like an adult. We need to be able to then allow them to do these certain things as exceptions to other rules. So those things can happen if we just take the time. And as you mentioned, we're polite and we don't yell and scream. We want to be invited in the room. And that doesn't mean that we're kissing people's feet and trying to be nice. That just means speaking the way we're speaking right now about these
Mhm.
issues, because I think most people understand that this is a heinous thing. This is a way of exploiting children.
Yeah, there's occasionally you'll have people kind of go off on some weird tangent, but I want to say 95% of people simply aren't aware, or they're unaware of how dire the consequences are. You're talking about, somebody's been married and been treated like an adult, now they're not married anymore. That has been kind of a faux solution that some states have offered for keeping the minimum age to marry below 18, is that they're emancipated. But at the same time, the social service organizations, lawyers, landlords, they don't really want to accept the
Right.
emancipation, right? It's still too much
Exactly.
of a high risk for them. So sometimes legislators just don't realize that they think that there's a safety net there, but that safety net is just really old, rotten, and full of holes, and children are continuing to fall through them.
Mhm.
And so by not raising the minimum age to marry in all states, we're really just overtaxing an already overtaxed social system.
It sounds really flippant of me to say this, but I mean it. Why can we have laws throughout the land that says you must drive no faster than 55 in most places, but not have a legal age in 50 states where you need to be married? I just don't get it.
Right. And talking to people, I mean, social workers understand that child marriage is bad. Healthcare professionals agree that child marriage is bad. The American Academy of Pediatrics says child marriage is bad. Law enforcement says that child is bad. Even prosecutors are like, oh, this is bad, even though it's difficult to bring to trial because, children don't generally want to prosecute their parents, who are often the perpetrators. Everybody, educators, child marriage is bad. The only people that don't seem to be coming to the table and moving on it are just legislators. That is it. Like every other sector in the entire country says this is really bad. We need to do something. And in many states, everybody's coming together. I mean, I've had, pastors and law enforcement and prosecutors and everybody offer letters of support or show up to hearings or sign on to letters of support with legislators, and legislators are just kind of like, we have so many issues and we just can't get to this one right now. So it's not a matter of we're seeing a lot of opposition right now. It's just a matter of legislators just aren't making it the priority that it should be. And you're right. I kind of wish there was a database, because I think if we had a database like that and we could start adding up the expense
Mm-hmm.
That child marriage has, I bet we probably would get a higher priority. The data shows that girls that are married under the age of 18, they have an average of 5 children by the time they're 21. No education, no resources. That is a huge drain on our systems.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but I have a friend of mine who does, he is a obstetrician. He does a lot of births, um, does more births, some people say in the state of California than anybody else. And he has seen situations, especially in the past, where the same individual will come with 3 or 4 different girls that are underage, and they'll report them, and then they just start doctor shopping. And
Mhm.
it happens all the time. This and the human trafficking situation is not getting better; it's getting worse. Um,
Absolutely, it is.
and yeah, I've lived on the East Coast and done a lot of nonprofit work. Live out here on the West Coast, and it is everywhere, and getting worse. And it's in plain sight. You mentioned technology and the way that they can on get in touch with these people online. And I know parents mean well. I'm talking about the parents that want to do well. Well, I'll just take their phones away, or I'll just take the computer access away. That's part of it, but it's a lot more than that. It's about having some discussions you're not normally used to getting into having. Or I don't want to bring that idea to people's heads. No, it is so important that you have these conversations because
Oh,
somebody's going to
absolutely.
talk to them. Go ahead. I mean,
Absolutely. And that's where I'm at right now as I'm seeing the cases and the devastation of the families and just the boldness of perpetrators online. And I've known, a few people that really did all the things, that they should have. They took their kids' devices before they went to bed. So they make sure that, they're not up all night, talking to strangers. They're checking in with their kids. They're installing the apps to monitor their children's behavior. They're having these conversations. But you have to keep in mind, human trafficking is a $150 billion industry.
mm,
There's some room in there for some marketing. There's some room in there for some mismanagement, and
oh
they
yeah,
absolutely take advantage of it. So sifting through and getting good, reliable information on how to keep your kids safe against the odds is really difficult. And then again, here's our laws. When people do get caught, when they do get prosecuted, they're out in like 30 days doing it
yep.
again. There
Oh,
really isn't much of a deterrent to keep them from doing it. The gains way outweigh the risk. And until that changes, we're not going to have any traction here. And they're just getting smarter and they're just getting easier at it. So, for example, right now, one thing I'm hearing from law enforcement where I work is that perpetrators understand the difference in how law enforcement responds to missing children.
mm,
Right. So if they're labeled as a runaway, they're not going to put as much time and resources and urgency behind finding that child than if they're listed as a missing child or an Amber Alert. So these perpetrators are coaching these kids to stage their situations to make it look like they ran away, not that
right.
they were lured away by a perpetrator so that they have more time to do what they need to do and escape and be undetected. So, I think for normal people, it's really difficult to wrap your head around that there's literally just people out there
Mm,
who that's their full-time job is to try and harm children and harm as
yes.
many children as they can and profit off of. I think as normal decent human beings, it's really difficult, to put yourself in that headspace and accept that that's what's happening. But unfortunately, it really is, and it's happening a lot. And there's a lot of them out there. And so, just like with child marriage, it's really up to our legislators to set those protections and parameters, to empower law enforcement and prosecutors to really go after these people and get them off the streets and deter them from what they're doing, as well as allowing more funding for the public service campaigns. So
Oh,
similar to like in the 90s, when we were talking about drugs and everybody thinks it'll never happen to my child, but then you realize that it doesn't discriminate. No matter
nope.
what your education level is, no matter what zip code you live in, no matter how much money you have in your bank account, no matter how many times you go to church a week, you can be susceptible to human trafficking. There can be a perpetrator that can slip in through the cracks and get to your kids. That is the reality of the situation. So if you aren't arming yourself with appropriate information, if you don't have that support of how to talk to your kids in, at age appropriate stages, because how you talk to your kid when they're 8 is going to be different than how you talk to your kid when they're 13. So,
Absolutely.
putting resources out there to give parents the tools that they need to have those conversations with their children to get ahead of the bad guys and keep their family safe, I think it's super important.
As we transition to close here, if you could just talk a little bit about the fact that, you have to be very concerned about that nefarious person on the internet somewhere. You better be very mindful about, Uncle Stephen or Aunt Selma or whatever the case may be, or the wacky neighbor up the street, but not be
Right.
phobic that you don't exist in the world, because you do live in a world where there are people. But the truth
Right.
is, most of these incidents happen, Alyssa, the
Somebody
conduit to somebody you know. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, as parents, we would like to bubble wrap our children and keep them safe and never let anything happen to them. And that would be great if we could do that. However, unfortunately, that's not how the world works, right? So the important things there are having conversations with your kids. I mean, your kids feeling like they can come and talk to you no
Oh,
matter
that's so
what.
key.
You're going to be there. You're going to be on their. You're going to believe them. You're going to be on their side. Focus on your child's well-being. If they're feeling okay about themselves. I mean, I know adolescence can be a bumpy time, a little more challenging, but monitor their self-esteem, monitor how they're connecting with their peers, monitor if they feel like they have a place in society, if they have a tribe of friends and they feel accepted and welcomed. By not having those vulnerabilities, they're going to be less susceptible to abuse. And then ultimately, if something bad does happen, the way that you respond to your child can make a significant difference in if this is something that's going to be a lifelong trauma or something that's more a chapter in their book, right? So, you might be really, really angry when you find out, what's been going on. And that is a time when you really need to communicate with your child of, I am angry, but I am not angry at you.
Correct.
Really go out
So
of your
important.
way
So
to
important.
manage your emotions, make sure that you're venting to a trusted adult, outside of the earshot of, because I understand that you're going to have some powerful emotions, but making sure that you are constantly communicating to your child that they are not at fault. It is not their fault. You're not angry at them. You don't love them any less. You're not supporting them any less. And just really make sure that you're being there for them.
I think that is so critical, and where we lose the message. And maybe it's time for another podcast. We'll talk about this, but shame kills.
Mm-hmm.
Shame kills. You're going to be afraid to tell your parents because of they're not going to be allowing you to go to graduation, or they're not going to allow you to do this, or you put a stain on the family, or people are going to think you're that type of person. Shame
Mm-hmm.
is that link to very bad things. And
It is.
I want to thank you for your time today, Genevieve. Well, if people want to learn more about you and what you do and what's next, how do they do that?
Sure. So you definitely can follow me on Twitter. That works out pretty well. But I have a website. It's www.resiliencyfoundation.com. There's an email list that you can sign up for there to see the work that we're doing. In regards to child marriage, there's a couple of larger organizations that we partner with, Tahari Center for Justice and Unchained at Last. And the Unchained at Last especially has a really great interactive map on their website where you can go and you can identify what the current laws are in your state and how to reach out to your
Beautiful,
legislators
beautiful.
if you feel like the laws in your state are not acceptable and need to be changed.
I want to thank you for your time and thank you for your fight. And sometimes you may feel you're alone in it. Trust me, you're not. And you're building up quite a base of people who follow you. I am one of them. And thank you for what you do. You're saving lives and saving futures.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you now.